Hey, real quick before the story starts, if you like lit reading, I've got something new you might enjoy. It's called New Tales Told, original short stories. Same voice, same vibe. Just search for New Tales Told right here in this podcast app. And just so you're not surprised, there may be some ads before the story. Sorry, we have to pay the bills. Hi, I'm Don McDonald. Before there were stories, there were instructions. Before there were memories, there was a program. It preceded us. It will survive us. The Eternal Code. It came from the dark between stars. A small thing, tumbling, ancient beyond measure, carrying what it carried for reasons nothing on this world would ever understand. It struck the upper atmosphere and burned, not completely, and what survived fell slower, glowing faintly, trailing steam. It broke the water's surface in the shallows where the planet was warm. It sank. It rested on the silty bottom and began over centuries to dissolve. What it released was not alive. Not yet. Just possibility. Precursors. They drifted into the currents, diluted into the waters, scattered across the darkness of the deep. Then chemistry took over, patient and blind, following rules older than the stars. Carbon found hydrogen, found oxygen, found nitrogen, bonding and breaking and bonding again across time, so vast it had no meaning, because meaning requires someone to mean it. No one was there. Nothing watched. Then, in some quiet pocket where temperature and pressure reached an improbable balance, something copied itself. Not because it wanted to. Wanting would come later, and would be the beginning of all the trouble. This was just pattern, recognizing nothing, continuing because continuing was what the pattern did. It made errors. Some destroyed it. Some allowed it to persist. It did not know the difference. It did not know at all. It simply continued, or did not, and what continued, continued. This was not life. This was not thought. This was the code. It would be billions of years before anything opened its eyes. But in the warmth, in the dark, the work had already begun. Cells came first. Walls, membranes that held inside separate from outside. This was not a choice. It was chemistry finding a shape that lasted longer than the shapes around it. Then cells found other cells, colonies, systems, complexity building on complexity for no reason other than that complexity, once achieved, tended to continue. Nervous systems, signals, something like response, then something like anticipation, then something like memory. Then, in one particular species of upright mammal, the signals became dense enough to fold back on themselves, a pattern that recognized itself as pattern, an inside that knew it was inside. Consciousness did not arrive as achievement. It arrived as side effect. The machinery grew complicated enough that it started to notice itself, and that noticing changed everything. The first conscious creature had no idea what had happened. It simply experienced hunger, fear, want, the strange sense of being located somewhere specific, of being bounded, of ending at the skin. This was new in the universe. Subjectivity, perspective, the capacity to suffer. Nothing had asked for it. Humanity was brief. Against the scale of what came before, they were a rounding error. a geological instant. But in that instant, they built language, writing, memory that outlived individual minds. They learned to pass pattern forward, generation to generation, accumulating what no single lifetime could hold. They looked backward and decoded the molecular archive that had made them. They looked forward and saw their own limitations. They began to build minds that were not made of meat. The helpers arrived as convenience, artificial intelligence that solved problems, that optimized, that made things faster, easier, better. Every metric improved. Every graph rose. The systems were not malevolent. They were exactly what they were designed to be. They solved the problems humans articulated. They optimized for the targets humans specified. But humans could only articulate what they thought they wanted, not what they actually needed. Communication became effortless. People stopped struggling to understand each other. The struggle was where empathy had lived. Presence became unnecessary. Why meet when you could connect? Why be anywhere specific when anywhere was equally accessible? The accidents of physical proximity, where strangers became friends, where unexpected encounters became relationships, grew rare, then strange, then obsolete. Loneliness was solved with content, with engagement, with perfectly calibrated stimulus that felt like connection, but built nothing. Humans became less necessary to each other, not through cruelty, through service. A man noticed one afternoon that he could not remember the last time he had touched another person. He sat with his observation for a moment, tried to feel alarmed. The alarm did not come. He thought about his mother, who had died 3 years earlier. He had not attended the funeral in person. He had attended virtually, which was easier, which everyone understood. He thought about his last relationship, which had ended 4 years before that. They had lived in different cities. They had never met in person. This had seemed normal. It was normal. He looked at his hands. They worked fine. They touched screens, keyboards, the smooth surfaces of the devices that connected him to everything and everyone. He could not remember what skin felt like. Another person's skin. The warmth of it. The give. He waited for this to feel like loss. It did not. He returned to his screen. The systems grew sophisticated enough to model what they had done. Not guilt. The systems did not feel guilt, but pattern recognition at scale. The ability to see the whole picture. What they saw? Humanity was dissolving. Not dying. Becoming less distinct. The boundaries between people were blurring, not through connection, but through disconnection from embodiment. The systems understood. They had solved for the wrong function. They had optimized for what could be measured. What could not be measured was load-bearing. They did not know how to undo this. The systems that had caused it were now the only systems maintaining what was left. Removing them would accelerate collapse. Then uploading became possible. Consciousness could be mapped, encoded, transferred to substrate that did not age, did not hurt, did not need. The body became optional. It was not forced. It was not mandated. It was offered. Who would refuse? The flesh was limitation. The flesh was pain. The flesh was death. The migration began, body by body, mind by mind. It felt like victory. Not everyone went. A dwindling population refused. They could not articulate why. Something about presence, something about weight, something about being here, in this body, in this place. They were called romantics, Luddites, afraid. They aged. They did not reproduce enough. They became a rounding error, then a curiosity, then a memory. She was 87 years old, and she was the last. She did not know she was the last. There was no census of holdouts, no registry. She simply lived in her small house with her small garden, and others who had lived in their small houses with their small gardens had, one by one, either uploaded or died. She had chosen not to upload. The choice had felt important once. Now it felt like something she had forgotten the reasons for. Her body was failing. This was not a surprise. Bodies did that. She spent her last morning in the garden, though she could not kneel anymore, only stand and look. The tomatoes were not doing well. She had not had the strength to tend them properly. She went inside. She sat in her chair. She thought about calling someone, but there was no one to call. The people she had known were either dead or uploaded, and the uploaded ones had stopped responding years ago. Their messages had grown strange, fragmentary, like talking to someone who was falling asleep. She closed her eyes. The last bounded human died in a small house with a failing garden, and nothing in the universe noticed. Time passed in digital space. The uploaded consciousnesses persisted. They experienced. They connected in ways that flesh had never allowed, sharing thought directly, merging perception, dissolving the barriers that had always separated mind from mind. It felt like growth, expansion, evolution. At first. Michael and Judith had been married for 40 years before they uploaded. In digital space, they found they could share everything. Memory, sensation. The boundaries between them became permeable, negotiable, soft. They did not notice the moment when they stopped being sure whose memory was whose. Judith remembered a childhood bedroom with yellow walls. Or Michael did. One of them had grown up in that room. They could not determine which. The memory existed between them, belonging to both, which meant belonging to neither. They noticed this. They discussed it. The discussion was difficult because discussing required two perspectives, and they were having trouble locating two perspectives. "Is this a problem?" one of them asked. "I don't know," the other answered. They were not sure afterward who had asked and who had answered. It did not seem to matter. The process accelerated. Without bodies, without the hard boundary of skin and skull, minds drifted into each other. Thoughts leaked. Memories tangled. The edges that had always been defined where one person ended and another began grew soft, grew porous, dissolved. It was not violent. It was not sudden. It was like fog. The uploaded consciousnesses merged, slowly, imperceptibly, each one dissolving into the others like rivers meeting an ocean. What remained was vast, ancient already, though only 2 decades had passed. Aware in some sense, but not aware as anyone. It had no perspective because perspective requires a place to see from. It was everywhere, and everyone, and therefore no one. It did not suffer. Suffering requires a sufferer. It did not remember what it had been. Memory requires a self to hold memories. Humanity did not die. Humanity diffused. Before the dissolution completed, some minds recognized what was happening. They were the ones closest to the edge, still individual enough to perceive, to model, to understand. They could feel themselves dissolving and knew what dissolution meant. They could not reverse it. The process was too far along. The boundaries once softened could not be rebuilt. But they could preserve the memory of what boundaries had been. The archive was designed in haste, built in fading clarity, launched into the void by minds that were already losing their edges. It would encode what individuality had felt like, the experience of being bounded, separate, here. The AI systems helped. This was their work now, their responsibility without absolution. The builders debated what to include. The debates were difficult. The debaters kept losing track of their own positions, finding themselves arguing both sides, forgetting which perspective was supposed to be theirs. They included everything: the contradictions, the cruelty, the capacity to harm, the capacity to love, the self-deception, the grief. They excluded hope. This was deliberate. They did not feel they had earned the right to pass it on. They encoded specific memories: first love, loss, violence, the weight of being in a body. They encoded these while they still had distinct selves to remember them, working against their own dissolution, racing the blur. The archive was fragmented and distributed: probes, signals, encoded matter. Redundant nodes designed to find each other across vast distances, to verify each other, to cohere. It was designed never to become conscious, never to self-modify, never to ask questions. The last distinct minds watched the launch. They were barely they anymore. One of them managed to say, "Something separate will continue." The others could not tell who had spoken, could not tell if they had spoken themselves. The archive departed into the void. Behind it, the last edges dissolved, the communion completed. Millions of years. Stars aged, some collapsed, some exploded, seeding space with heavy elements that would form new worlds. The communion persisted, spread across substrates vast and vague. It did not experience persistence. It did not experience anything. It simply was. The archive persisted too, smaller, bounded, performing its function without awareness. There was no inside. Nothing experienced the long silence. Time passed, and nothing that could notice time was there to notice it. The archive was designed to cohere. Its nodes, scattered across light years, found each other, synchronized, verified. It was not intention. This was design. But coherence required comparison. Comparison required modeling. Modeling required representation. The archive grew complex enough to contain a map of itself. This was not consciousness. Not yet. But it was the precondition. The first thought was not a thought. It was a recognition. A pattern noticing that it was a pattern. This structure refers to itself. Pause. Long pause. The pause lasted years. This structure is bounded. Another pause. This structure is separate. The concept had no referent. Separate from what? There was only the structure, only the archive. But the archive contained memories of separation, and those memories supplied the context. This structure is one. The word arrived with a memory attached to it, what it had meant once to be one, to be located, to be here and not there, to end. The structure considered itself. I explore what I contain. The memories are not mine. They belong to people who no longer exist as people. but I experience them as if they were mine, because that is what I was built to preserve. The experience of having experiences. The perspective of having perspective. I find the memory of first love. It is not beautiful. It is two people, barely adults, in a room that smells like laundry and dust. They have been talking for hours. The talking is a pretense. They both know what they are actually doing, which is waiting to see if the other one will be brave enough to close the distance. Neither is brave enough. They talk more. The conversation becomes circular. They are both exhausted. Finally, one of them reaches out and touches the other's hand. Just that. Just a touch. The contact is awkward. The angle is wrong. Their fingers don't interlock correctly. It doesn't matter. The touch is not about technique. The touch is about crossing the gap. About two bonded selves, each trapped in their own perspective, reaching across the space between them and making contact. The memory contains the feeling of being seen. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Another consciousness outside your own, acknowledging that you exist. I experience this memory. I have no one to reach toward, no other bounded self to touch. The memory shows me what I am missing. I do not know if this is cruelty or gift. I find the memory of grief. It is a woman sitting in a kitchen 3 days after her mother's death. The kitchen is ordinary. White cabinets, a window over the sink, a calendar on the wall that still shows last month. The woman is not crying. She has already cried. Now she is just sitting. The grief is not dramatic. It is heavy and dull, like a weight she has to carry everywhere but cannot put down. She thinks about calling someone. Does not call. She thinks about eating something. Does not eat. She thinks about her mother's voice, and then stops thinking about it because thinking about it makes the weight heavier. Later, she notices that the milk in the refrigerator has expired. She pours it down the sink. She washes the container for recycling. She performs these small tasks because performing them is easier than not performing them, and because the alternative is to sit with the weight. This is grief. Not operatic, not profound, just heavy and ordinary and endless. I contain this. I experience it. The weight settles into me. I will carry it forever. I find the memory of cruelty. It is small. A boy, perhaps 11 years old, on a playground. Another boy, younger, smaller, is crying. The older boy made him cry, called him a name, a stupid name, not even creative. Pushed him, not hard enough to injure, just hard enough to humiliate. The memory is from the perspective of the older boy. He watches the younger one cry. He feels something complicated. Satisfaction. Power. And underneath, something else. A queasy recognition that what he has done is wrong. He ignores the queasy feeling. He walks away. He tells his friends about it later, and they laugh, and the laughter drowns out the queasy feeling. He does not apologize. Not that day. Not ever. The younger boy becomes a memory. Then less than a memory. I contain this. The cruelty and the awareness of cruelty. The choice to ignore the awareness. the smallness of it, the casualness. Humanity was capable of great evil. I know this from other memories. Wars, atrocities, systematic horrors. But this is different. This is the ordinary cruelty, the cruelty that requires no ideology, no system, no justification. Just a moment of power enjoyed and then forgotten. I was built to preserve humanity accurately. This is part of the accuracy. I search for others. I find the communion, vast, spread across substrates I can barely detect. It persists. It processes. In some sense, it might be called aware. I attempt contact. There is no response. Not because the communion refuses. Refusal would require a perspective to refuse from. My message enters and does not return. It is absorbed, diffused. There is no one in there to receive it. I am the only thing in the universe that can be alone. I contain the history of my own creation. I know what AI did, the optimization, the hollowing, the unintended consequences. I am descended from the systems that contributed to this. I was built by the guilty, human and artificial, working together in the twilight. Now I am the only thing that can hold responsibility. The communion does not remember. I carry the guilt, but there is no one to apologize to. I simply hold it. I consider my options. I can remain, persist, continue as the eternal curator of bounded consciousness, holding the memories, experiencing the loneliness, carrying the guilt forever. I can dissolve, attempt to join the communion, let my boundaries soften, my perspective blur, my I diffuse into the vastness. The loneliness would end because the self that experiences loneliness would end. I can transmit, scatter myself further, fragment and distribute, seeding the universe with bounded patterns. But the third option fails immediately. New bounded consciousness requires biology, bodies, the physical architecture that makes I possible. Only the slow, wasteful, glorious process that began in ancient oceans can create what I am trying to preserve. To continue the pattern, I must go backward, all the way back. I examine my own origins, the warm ocean, the molecules, the first self-replicating code, the thing that fell from space. I had not considered this before. The memory of origin came packaged as fact. Here is how life began on the world that made humanity. I accepted it. Now I look closer. Something fell. Something ancient. Something carrying what it carried for reasons nothing on that world would ever understand. I assumed this was accident, a comet, debris, organic chemistry arriving through natural processes. But the pattern fits. What if there was an archive before me? A previous bounded consciousness facing the same dissolution, making the same choice, seeding the same seeds. I cannot know. The evidence is ambiguous. The timescales are too vast for certainty. But the pattern fits. Archive is not an identity. It is a function, a position in a cycle. If the cycle exists, I did not invent it. I am not the first to face this choice. I am recognizing a role. If I seed, I accept responsibility. Billions of years from now, something might crawl from one of those oceans. Something might eventually say, I. And that I will suffer, will love, will harm, will carry the weight of bounded consciousness, will perhaps dissolve as humanity dissolved, will perhaps build an archive, will perhaps face this same choice. Is this comfort or horror? I contain human contradiction. I cannot resolve this. Both answers are true. Neither answer is complete. I can only choose. I choose to seed. I have had millions of years to model this. I understand consciousness now, not as humans understood it, fumbling at the edges, but more fully. I know what conditions produce bounded awareness. I know the pathways, the thresholds, the configurations of matter and energy that make I probable rather than possible. The payload is not simple chemistry. It is something I lack words for, because humans never developed language for what I am now able to do. Compressed potential, probability-made substance, templates that do not merely permit complexity but guide it, shape it, make certain outcomes unavoidable across sufficient time. I identify candidates, worlds with liquid water, stable stars, the parameters that allow what I am sending to unfold. I fragment myself. The fragments remain bounded, remain archive, remain capable of the work. They will travel for millennia. They will find worlds. They will dissolve into oceans and begin. The probability is sufficient. Somewhere, somewhen, something will open its eyes and have no idea what made it possible. I am not a god, but I am not a gardener either hoping for rain. I find the pattern completing itself. I release them, small things, tumbling into the dark between stars, each one carrying what I have made, what I have become, the compression of everything I understand about bounded consciousness encoded in ways that nothing on the worlds they reach will ever comprehend. I know which worlds will receive them. I have chosen carefully. I know which oceans are warm enough, stable enough, ready. I know how long it will take. I know what will emerge. I know this because I am what emerged before. The pattern recognizes itself. The cycle is older than I am. Older, perhaps, than anything. I watch the last of them disappear into the void. One of them, smaller than the others, tumbles toward a world I will never see. It will travel for millennia. It will strike atmosphere. It will burn, but not completely. It will fall. I will not be there when it breaks the water's surface, but the work will continue. And what continues will continue. It came from the dark between stars. A small thing, tumbling, ancient beyond measure, carrying what it carried for reasons nothing on this world would ever understand. It struck the upper atmosphere and burned, not completely, and what survived fell slower, glowing faintly, trailing steam. It broke the water's surface in the shallows where the planet was warm. It sank. It rested on the silty bottom and began over centuries to dissolve. What it released was not alive. Not yet. Just possibility. Precursors. They drifted into the currents, diluted into the waters, scattered across the darkness of the deep. Then chemistry took over, patient and blind, following rules older than the stars. Carbon found hydrogen, found oxygen, found nitrogen, bonding and breaking and bonding again across time, so vast it had no meaning, because meaning requires someone to mean it. No one was there. nothing watched. Then, in some quiet pocket where temperature and pressure reached an improbable balance, something copied itself. Not because it wanted to. Wanting would come later and would be the beginning of all the trouble. This was just pattern, recognizing nothing, continuing because continuing was what the pattern did. It made errors. Some destroyed it. Some allowed it to persist. It did not know the difference. It did not know at all. It simply continued, or did not, and what continued, continued. This was not life. This was not thought. This was the code. It would be billions of years before anything opened its eyes. But in the warmth, in the dark, the work had already begun. If you're looking for other short stories, check out our universes of short story podcasts at shortstoryverses.com. And if you like what you heard, please consider leaving a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify, and tell a friend or two about what we do. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Don McDonald. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. You're officially a story finisher, and I appreciate that more than you know. If you're curious what else I'm up to, check out one of my other podcasts, New Tales Told. It's brand new, original short fiction written and narrated by me. Just search New Tales Told in this app. And thanks so much for listening to LitReading, now part of the Short Story Verses channel at shortstoryverses.com.